Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and we're finally going to recap Game Week 5. Now, of course, it wasn't the best week possible, and in fact, it was a very terrible week, I think, for most players, to be quite honest. With exception to some people who obviously benefited from some of the punts, like going to Rafinha, maybe going even to Sar at this point in time, given the fact that he has nice fixtures coming. But I think, yeah, in general, it was for most people a very terrible game week with a lot of players I think not playing as expected, with Trent being a key one. Some players obviously holding on to Torres, not kind of benefiting from that as well. And fortunately for me, the game week actually turned from what was a terrible week where I could have dropped down maybe even to the the like the top 50k to kind of staying within that territory. And actually I've ended up this week in around that kind of 11,800 territory. So a little bit of a red arrow, and that's totally fine. That's expected, right, at different points in the season. Um, it's not the first red arrow we've had this season, but I think overall it was as good a game week as it really could have been. Jota could have scored another goal himself, maybe. Cody or Williams could have played better games, but I think actually what this game week tells me, to be honest, on this review is that part of the lesson as well is just learning to not knee jerk and kind of get swayed by other people's opinions. Because if you actually remember my kind of game week 4 video, which I'll show you right here, this was actually the wildcard team that I wanted to go with first. This was the video that I posted to you guys. And with exception to the fact that DCL was injured this week, I would have benefited, at the end of this week, probably an additional 20 points, right? With Greenwood, overperforming, I think, Torres a little bit more by 2 to 3 points, I'd say, due to the lack of clean sheets. And then Rudiger and Marcel, having much, much better weeks than Cody and Christensen, respectively. But that is a general lesson you have to take. You can't just look in the past and be like, oh, I could have done this. I think it's a good lesson just for me as well, to make sure that throughout the course of the season, I should trust my gut, and follow through with those decisions and actually see how those kind of pan out, as opposed to get worried, that I'm missing on, key players that other players might have. And that's pretty much the lesson learned for me. That pretty much I had to learn immediately last week after Marcel scored, or assisted twice, and now obviously with Rudiger scoring, I'm paying the price a little bit more. The good thing, of course, for this week was Christensen managed to get a clean sheet himself. I think what the Christensen kind of transfer, or him playing versus Tottenham shows is that ultimately he is, I think, relied on in terms of the big games. And I think when we actually look at the Man City fixture next week, even though it's not a nice fixture, we probably expect maybe both teams to score potentially. Um, Ultimately, it's a fantastic fixture, right, for Christensen to play, I think, in my opinion. And I think Tuchel clearly shows that when the games are maybe extremely tough, that Christensen is someone he can rely upon. He's already played him versus Liverpool. He's played him versus Tottenham for now, and I think we can expect him to continue playing versus Man City. In the future, though, of course, the plans that most people will be kind of asking would be, whether we go into Reece James, whether we go into Alonso, and whether we go into Rudiger. I think, given the fact that Christensen is already in my team and he's potentially a rotation option, I would like to keep Christensen in my team. I would maybe actually like to go instead to go for a double Chelsea defense by maybe game week 7/8, where I probably would like to bring Rudiger in because he's the most nailed, and I would probably benefit from double Chelsea clean sheets potentially, or just have Livermento play, because what we've seen so far is Livermento can come off the bench and provide fantastic points, and that's what he's done so far, and he's done it tremendously. So I feel like I can live with a team where Livermento is maybe my fifth defender. If I move into kind of a back four, it would also be kind of slowly acclimating my team towards getting someone like Diaz, or someone like Cancelo, right? Because if we look at the City fixtures, realistically, post the Liverpool game, I think the only tough fixture there is Man United. I think in the rest of the games, whilst I'm not expecting just clean sheets for Man City, these are fantastic games for us to get a lot of value from the 610 players. And I would kind of look back at, players like Traore, players like Trincao, who I always said to avoid on, in my personal opinion, is that when you compare them to some of the defenders this season, I think there's a clear case to say that Liverpool, Chelsea, and City all have fantastic defenses. And you can probably go with a back four, game week 7 to 8 onwards, to be honest, and maybe get more value than some of the midfielders, right? Because Okay, let's say we look at, let's say, Sar this week, who had an absolutely explosive week, and that's fantastic, right? You're capitalizing on Watford versus Norwich, and to be fair, if you're someone who wants to look at short term right now, I think Sar makes a lot of sense still. He plays Leeds and he plays Newcastle in the future, and if you're looking at someone like Demarai Gray, he gets to play versus Norwich next week, so I think that's a huge fixture for him, and if you want to kind of chase those kind of short fixtures, then that makes sense. Because for me, I think the issue with my team is that I probably would like to keep Benrahma now for Leeds because I think he still deserves to continue starting for Moyes. I don't know if Moyes shares that same opinion. Maybe I'll lose out, but I think I can actually roll my transfer, still benefit from Jota versus Brentford, still benefit from Greenwood. Um, who's he playing? Sorry, versus Aston Villa. Sorry, my mind blanked there. But we could benefit from those and probably think about a double transfer. I don't know if I'm 100% set on immediately moving away from Ronaldo into Lukaku. I probably will do so. Um, but I think also the premium structure, what today showed with Chelsea, is that it's not like Lukaku is going to score every week, and that's exactly what we predicted, right? When we went for a two premium structure in terms of the wild card. I'm happy that I still have Antonio, and the general strategy or ideology of patience over points has worked out because I now have Antonio in what should be a nice fixture versus Leeds because with maybe Ayling being injured as well, Leeds are in a very dire state in terms of defense. So that's kind of a little bit of benefit there, and we probably have Trent because he doesn't have COVID. He was, I think, ill for the game, but it probably means that he returns versus Brentford, and I think we can benefit from those kind of points. And my bench suddenly looks good again, even though I still have, many from Leicester. But that's pretty much how I feel about things right now. I really think I can roll a transfer for the next week. And I think, for those of you who have, midfielders in similar positions, I think I would advise the same thing. I think, most of the teams that we crafted around game week 4 to 5 all have good fixtures with exception to Man City. If you're a Torres holder, I think this is a key point where you look at your team and say, do I have a strong enough bench to withstand, let's say, Torres versus the next two games, or do I have kind of major issues in my team? So, for example, if you're someone who has maybe let's say someone like Greenwood who hasn't looked super good in the right wing position, you could probably roll a transfer, try to benefit from Greenwood in this fixture, and maybe move away from him. Because what we've seen so far, I think, is when Greenwood doesn't start at the centre forward position, he probably doesn't really enjoy much. I think goal scoring dividends, even if United can create high scoring games. That's just my personal opinion right now. I'm actually more tempted to move away from someone like Greenwood than I am Benrahma. I'm also more tempted to move away from someone like Jota than I am Benrahma once again. And for that reason, I'd like to roll my transfer and probably once again take a more patient approach and think about how I want to move away from this midfield. I could think, as I said, I would like to probably move into a four-man defense. And that would probably mean getting enablers of my team. So players like Sar could be a short-term punt. I think for those of you who are interested in going for Sar, I don't think it's knee-jerking, to be quite honest, to go into Sar because, as I said, the fixtures are very nice. And especially if those of you who still have your wild card, it makes a lot of sense to do it now. Benefit from the two fixtures ahead of us before you, let's say, transfer into Chelsea assets and strengthening other areas of your squad by that point in time. So I think those make sense. I'm still quite high on Gallagher. Obviously, he has tougher fixtures. He's playing versus Leicester next, I believe, and then he has Arsenal soon as well. Not that they're particularly great teams. We've seen Brighton, we've seen other teams score versus Arsenal as well. So I think Gallagher's an interesting kind of flex point. I think for a lot of people who are going into four backs, and I think that's pretty much my understanding of things. I would like to go into a four back, but if we go into the price predictions now, so I think what we can see now is that Ronaldo is probably set for another price increase. So this is where we can kind of, even if we go into Lukaku, pocket that kind of 0.1 mil off Ronaldo. Livermento's set for a price rise, which makes a lot of sense. Seems like Duffy and Alonso are also set for price rises. Now, I wouldn't necessarily go for Alonso now. I actually think Rudiger might be a little bit more tempting. But ultimately, I think if you don't already have a Chelsea player, you probably could go for Alonso alongside Rudiger. I think I'm in a little bit more of a different situation where I already have Christensen. I don't really want to waste a transfer on him, so I probably have to stick by him. He's a pretty kind of safe, tame pick, but I think, I'll probably have to live by it and maybe go for that kind of double backline. I mean, last season, I think I benefited very much from going Diaz and Stones, and I can't see why that can't be repeated with Christensen being in my team alongside maybe Rudiger if I go for Rudiger instead. And so if you don't have a Chelsea player, then I think Alonso makes sense, even as a standalone player. But as I said, you probably don't want to have two players who might be subject to rotation. Ironically, of course, I think we thought Alonso would be the most prone to rotation, but we've seen that Reece James hasn't been played versus Tottenham, and I think for that reason, alongside the fact that Hudson-Odoi can play versus some very weak opposition, and that would be a good time for Tuchel to actually rotate. I actually think, yeah, Alonso probably makes the most sense if you don't have Rudiger in your team. Um, Moving on from the kind of price rises, I think we're really just talking about maybe Lukaku hitting a price rise. I don't think it'll happen during the week. It seems like Diaz is most likely going to get a price rise along with maybe Cancelo. I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Because as I said, I think people are starting to see the value of how strong some of the top teams have in the Prem. I mean, ultimately, I think we have a big three right now, and United is slightly behind, in terms of the top four. But those three teams have excellent defensive players, and they have more value, in my opinion. I think just over the course of multiple game weeks than some of the midfielders that we're kind of punting on. And for that reason, I think when you have a flexible structure and you have a Man City backline and a Chelsea and Trent backline, then I think you'll be in very very good positions. If we look at the price falls, I don't think there's anything too surprising here. I think Fernandes continuing to drop is a little bit of a surprise. I think he really could have got an assist today, but I think it's understandable given the fact that it seems like week on week people are just starting to move to Ronaldo. And I think we'll also hit a point where I think Ronaldo's effective ownership will start to breach over 100% again. Um, and I think the captaincy decisions with Salah will have to be a little bit more tricky because, we've seen that Brentford seem to be a very capable defense, but this would be Brentford's kind of big first test, right, versus a very, very good opposition. And that will be interesting, I think, for this week when we come into the captaincy decisions. Nothing else is too, I think, exciting in terms of defense. I think the only real movements in terms of defense is the fact that Arsenal seem to be surging on that kind of area. I will say that if you actually look at the expected goals versus Burnley, it wasn't very promising for Arsenal. It seems like what we consider to be weaker opposition, Norwich and Burnley, that they haven't done exceptional. I think winning 1-0, relying on a free kick, for example, from Odegaard, which was a fantastic free kick, mind you, and then also a little bit of a scrappy goal versus Aubameyang, despite the fact that I think Arsenal generally dominated Norwich that match, isn't the greatest sign to, let's say, maybe stick with Arsenal attackers. On top of that, I think you're probably best served to go with a cheap Arsenal defender. White or Tomiyasu makes sense for now. And I think Ramsdale has really opened up an opportunity for keepers. So if you're someone who's looking to wildcard now, I think there's a great opportunity to go into to Ramsdale potentially. I wanted to see him play, 2 to 3 games in a row, and right now he's played 2 games in a row. He seemed quite comfortable. They've kept clean sheets in that structure, and I can't see why Arteta would probably move away from it in the short term unless something crazy happened within the next 2 game weeks. But given the fact that Arsenal have generally nice fixtures apart from Tottenham, Ramsdale could be a very interesting kind of wild card by game week 7. So I think that's the kind of only interesting kind of element that I think I would look at in the future. If you're wildcarding as well, obviously continue to have Gallagher on your watch list and things like that too. But that's it for me for this game week. As I said, I'm probably most likely going to roll a transfer. I'll have to kind of see as the week goes on whether I kind of reassess things. But I think at this point in time, the team is in a good position for game week 7. If I have 2 free transfers, I think, shake things up quite a bit, and by game week 8, I should have a relatively different squad that should be suited to kind of match the kind of game week 8 to 15 part of the season. Because as we all know, game week 15 plus is a very United kind of focused part of the fixtures. Right now, it's actually quite strange to actually think about United assets, right, when we're going game week 15 and onwards. Because with the exception to Ronaldo, I think a lot of people would say that the United defense have unimpressed very heavily alongside someone like Dean, for example, from Everton. And I'm happy that I've moved away from Shaw and Dean because I did kind of see that they were kind of trending in a negative area where I think ultimately we're in a place that United, I think, concede too many chances per game due to their inability to keep control of the midfield. And I think it's nothing to do with the backline of United themselves, but just the fact that the opposition are getting a lot of opportunities to create in the midfield. And then in terms of Everton, I think just the fact that they have so many injuries right now, it's a little bit of a worrying state. They can't really keep control or tempo of the game. They don't have a clear kind of like talisman option like DCL who can hold up the ball as well. And I don't think Rondon really cuts it at this point in time. But we'll see going forwards in terms of defense. I think Wolves obviously were quite unimpressive today as well, or rather this game week. And I think Brentford, who are probably the most underlooked team defensively are the most interesting. As I've been saying for weeks as well, I'm not interested in doubling up on what would be a mid-table or bottom-table defense, but definitely having maybe one asset each from those teams in terms of Brentford, Crystal Palace, Wolves, or even Arsenal make a lot of sense, I think. So those are kind of assets to look for in the future as well if you have some kind of glaring holes in defense. But that's it for me this game week. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be the kind of update of the cheat sheet.